Welcome to the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast, the show for people who are ready to break out of survival mode in order to build a truly thriving life. I'm Amanda Solman, and along with Mark Jewell, my co-host and the founder and CEO of Mark Jewell Speaking and Training, we break down common roadblocks that keep people stuck surviving and share ideas to help you thrive each and every day. This week, Jon Anderson is joining me on the podcast to talk about strengths, how you can learn the strengths of the people around you, and then how you can leverage those strengths for success. This one is kind of a fun topic because the question actually came from one of our clients that wanted to take a deeper dive, not just knowing their own strengths, but wanting to learn how to really use strengths in order to help others too. So, enjoy. So we recently threw out the question to our community asking if anybody had any suggestions for podcast topics or anything they wanted to hear about. And one of our coaching clients threw out a really good question that we are going to dig into today. So his question was, how can you learn the strengths of the people around you? For example, your customers, your coworkers, your family, and how can you leverage those strengths? One, to bring out the best in them. 2, to help them overcome obstacles, and 3, to position your own ideas and products. And so I thought that was a really good question. Obviously, everyone who goes through one of our trainings, they learn all about their strengths, but we don't always necessarily have the strengths right in front of us for the people in our lives. And so we're going to dig into that. And I am fortunate enough to be joined today by Jon Anderson, another member of the MJST team here. And I have been working in strengths for quite a while, but Jon actually is the most recent one on our team to go through strength certification, specifically with Strength Scope. And so I'm excited to have you on, Jon, to bring the newest and greatest perspective to the conversation.
Yeah. Hi, Amanda. Hi, everybody else. I'm excited to be on here. I've got a feeling that this podcast is going to be very energetic. If you catch my pun.
I catch your pun. And I think that is an excellent intro, just to remind folks that we are going to be talking about strengths a lot in this conversation. Obviously, it's the whole topic. But the way that we here at MJST talk about strengths is we are talking about what energizes you. So just remember, like, a lot of people will talk about strengths maybe as their talents or things that they're good at. But we always talk about the fact that if you're good at something, but you don't like doing it and aren't energized by it, that is not a strength. And so just keep that in mind as we talk through, as we're always going to be talking in that context of energy and energizers when it comes to strengths, which may be different from some other places that you have heard about strengths in the past. So Jon, let's go ahead and dig into this. The person who asked this question asked a lot of questions kind of embedded in one. And so I want to break this apart piece by piece. So the first part of the question was, how can you learn about the strengths of the people around you? And that can be professionally or personally. So I'm curious, what are some of your favorite ways to start sort of uncovering the strengths of the people you either work with or maybe even people you know personally?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, the first one is to take the Strength Scope assessment, right, that we offer here at MJST, and that's going to tell you exactly what your top 7 strengths are and where you rate on everything, all 24 of those strengths. So that'd be like a number 1. But not all of us have access to that, or if you're just listening to this podcast, like maybe you've been through our programs before, or what have you, and you're leading a team, and without your team going through, it's like, okay, what are the strengths of this person, this person, this person, right? And as I was getting ready for, this podcast, I was thinking back to, because I didn't have the Strength Scope either, right? Like when I was managing a team. So I was looking back and I'm like, okay, so if I were to pin, like the top strengths of the people that I managed before, how would I do that? So for me, it was like, pay attention to the things that they do, like, right? Because naturally, like, so strengths, like as you said, we define them as energizers, so we like to do them naturally, right? So as I'm thinking about specifically 2 of the people that I managed before, because their strengths easily came up, right? So, so in one gal particular, like she really loved details, you know, so detail orientation strength of her, like almost to the point, like where you had to sit down with her, give her every little detail of how to do a project, and like, and she wouldn't start the project unless she in her mind had everything that she needed to start it, you know. So like things like that, like what are the things that they're always asking for? Like like is it things like that, so you just pay attention to like that, those kind of, what are they asking for? What do they tend to kind of lean against? Like the ways they're thinking, the language they use, things like that. Um, yeah, that's at least how I could tell. You just pay attention to the person and what they gravitate towards, I guess.
Yeah, I think that language is huge. We talk about it a lot with our sales folks who are going out and talking to customers too. Is like, you're not going to have, most likely you're not going to have every single customer take a strength scope assessment, but you want to know what their strengths are. Same thing if you're working in a company. Most likely not every single person at this point has taken some sort of assessment. And so some examples that I always come back to are things like, so if somebody asks you, why are we doing this? Like, to me, that's a clue. Hey, they might be like a common sense strength, or maybe they're a critical thinking strength, right? They need to understand the why, or they might be detail orientation to your example, right? Or if
Hmm.
somebody is constantly like I had a boss that was kind of like this one time, who she's constantly, just give me the top 3 highlights. What's the top 3 bullets? Don't give me a laundry like, give me the top three most important things. That's a really good indication that maybe they're like a decisiveness strength, or maybe they're strategic minded, right? So, if they're decisive, maybe they just want the most important information and they're good to go. Let's make a decision on that. Or they're strategic, and so they really tend to stay more at a high level. So that's another good example. But I just kind of want to
Hmm.
underline what you said, is that our strengths come so naturally to us that like they just naturally weave into our conversation and into our communication, and we do not even realize it. So that to me is exactly that. Language is, that's a big one.
Yeah, it's a huge indicator. If you really pay attention to the language they're using, they'll tell you exactly what their strengths are. And yeah, you don't. The strength scope assessment will, I mean, that's 100% accurate. But you can get a pretty good feel, for so for instance, I had my other the other guy I managed. He would get lost in conversation for an hour, and he'd be in my office. Next thing you know, it's an hour later, and he'd just come and ask me a simple little question, maybe like how my weekend was, or how my night is, or how do you, what is the answer to this question? Whatever. Hour later, it's like, okay, yep. What is his strength? It's developing them relationships. He's more the people kind of side of that, the diagram, the wheel, I guess, that we say. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and kind of on that same token of the language that they use, if you don't have a report or some sort of assessment to go off of, one of the other things you can kind of do is look at what lights them up in terms of projects that they work in, or in terms of like aspects of projects they work in. So for example, if I notice an employee who seemed to have like a lot of fun planning an event, I might kind of follow up with them and just say, what was it about planning that event that you really loved? So, was it, managing those details? Was it the fact that you got to meet lots of new people? Was it the fact that you got to bring this idea to life? Or maybe it was like learning other people's stories, like that empathy, compassion angle, right? Like, so if you notice that people are really enjoying something that they're working on, you might want to dig into that a little further and see what was it about that project that they really enjoyed. I always want to put a
Mhm.
caution, like, don't just assume that because they're good at something that it's a strength, right? We mentioned this earlier. They might be good at it and not like it. So be careful about putting good and strength on the same level, but there might be something specifically about that project that they're working on that really just that piece of it is what they really love. And therefore, because they love a piece, they love the whole project. And that might be good insight for you in the future to go, hey, if I have like a similar type project, or I know I want them to work on something, how do I get them on board? You might go, oh, hey, they really said they loved details. So that's the angle that I'm going to use on this next project or this next role or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great point. Is like when you do assign a project to somebody or a team, like how do they go about the project?
Oh, that's good.
Like
Yeah.
are they involving a lot of people? You know, so like do they like to be around people? Or do they like to be a little bit more by themselves? And take on the project by themselves, or are they somebody that like when you assign a project, maybe they have the initiative strength, right? Where they just take it on, they hit the door running, you know, and maybe, I don't know, like pay attention to how they perform the project, because each of us, like we can do the same thing, but we approach it differently, if that makes sense. And that's going to tell you straight up, like what energizes them, because like if, like you said, we can do things that we can be good at things that we don't necessarily like to do, right? But if we're given the freedom to do it how we want to do it, that's going to show where our strengths are, because we're gonna do it how it gives us energy, right? So yeah, so that's I really like what you said. Is like with the project piece, when they're on projects, pay attention to what how they go about it.
Yeah, because they won't always tell you straight up what they liked or didn't like, but you can. I really like that addition that you bring in, because that how of how they tackle something. They might not even know they're doing it because it's so instinctual just to attack a project a certain way. But if you're really cognizant and paying attention, it can uncover a lot that you might not have been paying attention to previously.
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
last little note I wanted to add on this section is obviously we are very particular to strength scope and the strength scope language. So you'll hear us use the names of the 24 strengths that come up in that report a lot. And two, if you're interested in getting that report, you can email thrive today at markjeweltraining.com and we will tell you how to get hooked up with that. But I do just want to say, right, there are other tools out there that maybe your company might already be using or that you've used in the past. So if you've used something like StrengthsFinder or DISC or Myers-Briggs or one of those other kind of psychosometric assessments, you can use that to inform some things as well. So just because
Hmm.
we use one doesn't necessarily mean that you can't pull some value from some of those others or layer them together. I know we are big fans of, okay, so now you have your strength scope from us. What other assessments have you taken? Let's piece these together and see kind of how we can fill in some gaps that way too. So just wanted to kind of layer that in there, that strength scope is not the only way. It's a great way and we're big fans, but but it is
Yeah,
not the
yeah. I
only
want to.
way for sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Amanda. But yeah, I want to add on to that too. Is just because you've taken one of those doesn't mean you can't take this too. So, like for this one, like this just adds or enhances the value of the other ones as well. So it's not like one or the other. This can actually enhance, or improve upon the other ones to really, really dig in deep and figure out, who we really are, what energizes us, and what our strengths are.
Yep, absolutely. It's funny. So I took strength scope for the first time, gosh, almost 2 years ago, probably about 2 years ago exactly. But earlier this year, I took a strengths finder because that was what a different organization that I'm a part of in my free time was taking. And so it was interesting because now I'm looking at my strengths finder results through the lens of my strength scope results. And it's a very interesting perspective to layer all these pieces together. Obviously, we are also personal growth, self improvement nerds, so we love thinking about things that way. But yes, there are lots of resources out there for uncovering some of these things. So once you have started listening to the language that people are saying, once you've kind of watched which projects people gravitate towards or how they attack a project, or maybe they have taken an assessment and now you know a little bit more about their strengths. The next part of this question, Jon, was how can you leverage those strengths once you know them or have an idea of what they are? Because even in most cases, right, just having a vague idea can be useful. Um, how do you use those strengths to bring out the best in people? So I'll let you start us off. What are some of your thoughts on how to leverage strengths to really help people perform at their best?
Yeah. So I mean, the first thing is once you know your people's strengths, what lights them up, what gives them energy, then for me it's pretty easy to assign them like the tasks, right? Obviously, if you've got somebody that's a little bit more like let I don't know, let's say like internal, not so much external. Um, you know, you want you want somebody like if they're more of a team player, if they're more external, they want to develop relationships, right? You want to put them in a position where they can do more of that. Maybe you don't want to put them in a position where they're off working by themselves, where they have no people interaction, because that's what lights them up, is to interact with people, right? But if you have somebody that's more internally driven, put them on projects that they can maybe work by themselves a little bit. If they're just self-motivated, self-driven, they don't need other people to cheer them on and things like that. They can do a lot of the things by themselves. Um, for instance, going back to a few of my the people that I manage, like two different styles of people. Like one was very detailed, like to do things by herself, you know, give me the task, give me all the details, I'll get it done, right? And I'm going to make it freaking perfect. That's her detail orientation. The other one is like, I will do it, but I like to talk about it. I like to talk about how I'm going to do it. I like to include everybody on it, and get everybody's input, and knowing that, I would assign different tasks to them. Some tasks were just detail oriented, like I needed all the details on stuff, and then some tasks I needed more of a team effort, I needed more people involved. And, so I would assign tasks, based on what I thought their strengths were. So yeah.
hmm One of the examples that I think a lot about in terms of really specifying roles based on strengths is that sometimes we will talk about in the sales world, there are there's people who really like the getting of the new business, right? They like cold calling, they like getting the win, but they're not necessarily long-term relationship managers, right? They didn't necessarily want to manage the relationship, they just wanted to go out and sell something for the first time and get that business for the first time. Whereas on the flip side, there's other people who really struggle with going out and getting that new business. They don't like driving up driveways that first time, don't love the cold call, but they're excellent once that person has come on, that customer has come on board, and they're excellent at managing the relationship long term. And so we've actually seen in some companies where they have restructured their sales team to really kind of have like a business development, new business focused part of their sales team. And then they've got more of account manager, relationship manager parts of their sales team, because it allows both of those types of people to really focus on the thing that they are excellent at. Right. So, where that account manager might be great at follow through, but not so great at, getting over the scariness of talking to somebody for the first time, they're really going to be able to spend the time following through on customer requests, holding up communication really great. And then that other person who's like, oh, give me a driveway and I'll drive up it, or give me a random phone number and I'll call it, right? They can do that all day long. And they don't have to spend their time, beating themselves up about, how terrible they are at follow through, right? Like, and again, I'm talking in extremes here, and there are clearly people who can do both sides of that very well. But I think it's an interesting example of how you can literally restructure how roles in your company are built, and you don't have to do it the way it's always been done. If you start to say, how can I get my people working in their strengths more often? It might literally be changing their role to allow them to do that more often. I think that's again, it's just a very interesting example. And I've told that story to some sales teams who are like, oh no, that is not how it works in my company. But maybe not for you, but maybe for somebody else. So that was kind of a cool story for me. The other one that I sort of think about when it comes to this idea of project and role assignment is thinking about strengths and how you're making up a team, right? Now, that might be a short term
Mhm.
team, right? Like a specific project or initiative that you're working on, or it might be a more permanent team, like a sales team or a marketing team. This is where we think of things like hiring processes, is that, you don't necessarily always have to have like all, if we go back to strength scope, you don't have to have all 24 strengths covered in your team. But if there are some strengths that really lend themselves to some of the objectives your team is trying to accomplish, and you really have a blind spot in that strength area, that might be something to look at in terms of maybe like a lateral move or a promotion for someone, or a hiring a new person to come fill that role. And so I think, that project role assignment based on strength can be a really powerful thing when piecing together a team that is most effective. We have a client who was telling me about a division of their company. It's not one we work with right now, but he was saying he's just amazed by this team, because it's a team of like 5 or 6 people. And he is saying, like, these 5 or 6 people are incredibly different, but they're all unbelievably talented, and their strengths all complement each other, which is excellent for their customers because, if one person can't help them, there's somebody else on the team who can. And they've just really put together this excellent team formula versus just trying to have like 5 or 6 people who are all good at the same thing, duking it out for who's the top dog. So, strengths can be used in that way. But
Mhm.
any other go ahead.
Yes. So, just kind of like even reinforcing your point of how you can create a team based on their strengths, and obviously, like when my previous job, I didn't know what strengths were. I'll say that again, but sometimes, as leaders, you'll find out some things actually do work, and some things don't, right? So I was lucky in this work, right? So I had, a barn mentor that was amazing at his job. Like, he knew pigs, knew how to feed, knew how to do work the system, everything, right? But it was research, so we needed to have the little details, like to the thousandth decimal, or no, 100th decimal, and like sometimes that would get overlooked, right? So what do? We teamed him up with a guy that had like a master's degree in statistics. Obviously, love the details. So what do you do? Like, that's what he did. He went out and helped him, and they worked on the things like that. And so we got all the details we needed, but we also got everything done. Like the efficiencies, like some of the common sense things. Because sometimes when we're doing research, not everything is common sense. Like, sometimes we have to bring it back to like the common sense thing, and that's what this guy was like, loved having, like, taken that approach to, like, okay, I understand it, but it's not going to work, right? So we got that, then we got the details, we combined them, and made for a really great team, and worked well together too. Just based on each other's strengths. It was pretty awesome.
I love that. And I think that's just to kind of reiterate, right? Like, again, you don't have to have the report to know that certain people both are good at and get, just super excited about certain things. And so if you can sort of identify that and go, hey, I noticed this about this person, like, leverage that to your benefit. That is what we are talking about here. So, so Jon, one of the other ideas that I had in terms of how you can leverage leverage strengths to bring out the best in people uh, was, how can you incorporate people in certain conversations based on their strengths? But also, how can you include strengths in conversations that, or like strengths language in your conversations that sort of light certain people up, right? So if I'll tackle it from both ways. So let's say that you've got a room of people with enthusiasm strengths per se, or maybe optimism strengths. When you lead a conversation with those folks, you have got to incorporate language that is just, excited, cheering, whooping it up, giving them something to drive towards, because those people love to get excited about new and fun things. And so as a leader or as a coworker, you can say, if I want these people to be productive on this project, I've got to hit that enthusiasm string. Now, the other side of it is, okay, I know I've got to have let's say I know that I've got to have a tough conversation with someone. And maybe for me, that's really scary. But I know Joe, 3 cubicles down, man, he has a courage strength that, is a mile long. So I'm going to bring him into this conversation with me because he's going to help make it easier, right? Or, I know that my team has to plan an event and I'm not a detail oriented person, but I know, Sally is. And so I'm going to bring her in because she's going to catch all the things that I otherwise would miss. So just kind of saying, okay, what are the conversations that I'm having and how can I leverage strengths in those conversations, either to make the conversation itself easier because I have someone here who's really good at that, or how can I frame up my conversation in a way that just hits on all of the hot button strengths for the people that are in the group with me.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. So this is interesting because from my point of view, right? Depends on how you want this conversation to go. Like if you want everybody like super motivated, like at the end of the meeting, you know, like for instance, like enthusiasm and optimism, you bring everybody that's enthusiastic and optimistic in that meeting, and everyone's gonna leave like on fire and super motivated, right? But on the other hand, if you want a productive meeting, that might not be the way to go, right? You need somebody to come in there with maybe a little bit of common sense to kind of bring the average down a little bit to say, hey, I see that this is cool, great thinking, great ideas, but maybe not within the budget, like
Yep.
we can't fly everybody to Disney World, and have a great
No matter
time,
how
you
awesome
know?
that would be.
Exactly. Maybe let's just have like a team shooting, at a gun club or something like that. Might be a little bit more reasonable. So yeah. So to me, it's like
For
how
those who haven't been
frame.
following us on social media lately, we just took some folks out for a trap shoot. So Jon has a trap shoot, clay
Mhm.
shooting on the mind here.
Yep. Yeah. And that was such a fun event too. Great place too. But yeah, so you kind of got to look at like what are you trying to get from the meeting? What's the context? And what's the outcome that you're trying to get? And then you can kind of take certain people from your team with a certain strengths that you want to be there. Like you said, if you're working on an event, like you want somebody with some details. Like the detail orientation skills to work out all of the details. You know, um, you also if you're within a team, you want somebody to have initiative strength if you need somebody to take initiative on something. So it's just kind of like almost like picking and choosing your team, putting it together for the performance or the outcome that you want. That makes sense.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Uh I think that strengths can also be a really good tool when it comes to setting goals, or getting buy-in on goals. So, when it comes to setting goals, so for example, like if I've got a sales rep who is really relationship driven, right? Into relationship building. His goals might sound a little different than a sales rep who is really super like detail oriented or common sense, right? So, the first sales rep, it might be based on how many conversations am I having, right? How many numbers of new people can I meet? Or if I'm going to a trade show and I want to go specifically for that, like how many business cards can I hand out? How many hands can I shake, right? Whereas the other person who maybe is like maybe detail oriented or common sense or initiative, maybe, or here's a better one, maybe they're results oriented, right? So maybe they're really focused on, I want to hit, X number of goals or X number of people, right? But it's from the context of the number, not necessarily the relationship. So you can sort of take those goals from different angles depending on what the strengths of the person are. Right? The outcome might be the same, right? The goal still might be to sell however many dollars of product, but how you get to selling those dollars of product may look different depending on each individual person and their individual goals. The other side of that is that I know that there are a lot of companies who like sort of dictate certain goals to people, right? So, we need this number of new business accounts, or we need to do these many presentations, or we need to make these number of sales calls, right? And that sort of comes from on high, which, I totally get depending on the organization you're in. But let's not, beat around the bush, right? There are people who don't love being told what to do all the time. And so one way you can sort of get buy-in is when you're kind of communicating about those goals, maybe you leverage that other person's strengths in the conversation, right? So, again, kind of maybe using, again, the sales reps who are relationship building versus results oriented. That first person, you might say, hey, senior management has determined that that you need to sell X amount of product this year. So let's figure out, how many people would you have to talk to? How many people would you have to get to know in order to reach that dollar amount, right? So now we're leveraging their strengths. Now we're thinking in terms of people instead of in terms of dollar or volume, and that will light that person up. Whereas on the flip side, the person who's results oriented, maybe you can just say, hey, you got this number to hit. Go out and make it happen, right? Because they care about just that number that results on the back end. And again, we're speaking in generalities here. There are people who have both, but I just like to think of that as kind of how you might set up a conversation differently about setting goals or getting buy-in on goals based on a person's strengths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So for me, it comes down to how, like, when you start learning strength scope really and diving into it, and really go to like the certification stuff, we really talk about strength scope is not really an assessment, but more so like an approach, right? So like you could have a sales group, and well, you will have a sales group if you're in that business, and everyone's going to be different, right? Because nobody's strengths are the same, So like, but you could have one common goal, but the thing is how people are going to get to that goal is going to be different, and it's based on the lens that they see their goal through. I think that you were kind of saying, is like we have a certain number that we need to hit. Some people are like, they look at it as a number, or a dollar sign. Other people is like relationships, like they see, okay, I have to hit $1 million, this year. Some people might say, oh, that's just, 100 new relationships, so it's all about the lens, I think, that you are looking at, or looking through, to see your goal. That's what it means. Like that's what comes through me, I guess, when I'm looking to set goals. I look at through the lens of my strengths.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another one that's a good way to look at that example is when you're talking about goals with maybe someone who has common sense as a strength, right? Those people want to know why the heck that goal has been set where it is, right? And I'm one of them. So I'm speaking as from personal experience, right? As like, if you tell me, Amanda, you have to hit this goal by the end of the year, I'm going to go, okay, why? Like, is it just because like it, it does that level of goal, is that going to allow us to do something that we can't do right now because our sales aren't high enough? Or, like in our team, right? So this happens all the time. Mark's like, oh, I want to bring on, 2 new coaches by the end of the year. Okay. Why? Well, because, Jon's been overloaded. So I'd love to, bring somebody on to ease his coaching load. Or Mark, I want to, maybe he wants to go do more keynotes. So if we bring in another coach, that'll allow him to go do some of that. So like my brain is hardwired to go, okay, I'm not saying the goal isn't bad or isn't good. Just like, I need to know what your thought process is, where someone else might go, hey, you want to bring on 2 new coaches? Awesome. Let's go for it. Like, don't even question it at all. It's just my strengths and how I'm hardwired. So that's another example of how that might show up around the goal topic. The other thing I guess I had on my list in this section is that when we're talking about how to help people be at their best, I think one thing that we have to think about is why they're not at their best. And sometimes that can be because there's some sort of conflict. And so to help people get back to better footing, get back to being at their best, I think strengths can be a really good tool for understanding conflict. And so we'll talk about this in the next section too, under the next part of the question. But recognizing that sometimes conflict happens when our strengths are in overdrive and so is the other person, or we're in a situation that is causing our strengths to go into overdrive and that's making us stressed out, or, whatever. And just for review, I guess, strengths in overdrive is that point where you're using your strengths, but you're going a little bit too far, right? So you're detail oriented, but you're getting to the point where you cannot get out of the weeds for anything and your projects are never getting done. Or, you're overly empathetic and you're never getting anything done because your coworkers are constantly coming to talk to you and share their SAP stories with you, right? Or whatever it is, right? Our strengths are great until we're not getting things done, or we're stressed, or there's some sort of negative context. So I do think, like, if you're ever like, well, why aren't people at their best right now? It might be useful to look at strengths as one framework for breaking down the challenge that they're in. And I know that's the next question, so I don't want to go too far into it, but I always think, like, if you're struggling, and the goal is to get to being at your best, and strengths can be one way to do that. I don't know. What other thoughts do you have on kind of using strengths to help people be at their best?
Yeah, I mean, you can almost go in any direction, for how strengths can really be at your best. Like, I mean, you can use it as, it can help energize people. You can, like what we just talked about, use it to set goals, to create the language around that stuff, to get through, to work through conflict and stuff. So the thing, like when you talked about conflict, one thing that came through for me is when, like, if you're in a meeting and you have this person or whatever that is super, like, optimistic, right? And then you have the other person that is so annoyed by this optimistic person or enthusiastic person, right? Because this person's got emotional control, right? And they're just like, oh my God, like, they know each other so bad because they're both probably in overdrive, like you had mentioned, right? This emotional control person is in overdrive, so he, like, no emotion whatsoever, doesn't act like he's engaged or doesn't even want to be there, right? And then the other person's so, like, on cloud nine, like, yeah, and they're just like, oh my, like, they just annoy each other because they're trying to get each other to work through their strength. Like, you want the emotional guy to show the same amount of emotion as you are, right? And then, and then the emotional guy wants the optimistic guy to kind of come down a little bit, enthusiastic guy to come down a little bit, because you're just, like, way over the top, right? And that can create conflict, right? Like annoyances and stuff like that, So but knowing each other's strengths and where we are coming from, what gives us energy, is going to help reduce some of that conflict and maybe kind of avoid getting into that and then knowing when, hey, you're in overdrive a little bit, just rein it back a little bit.
Awareness of strengths, both of your own and other people's, is incredibly powerful. Uh, Sometimes I think just that awareness helps people be at their best, because now if I know what your strengths are, now I'm trying to do whatever it takes to help you operate in them more, and vice versa. So it's very, we're like, okay, assign roles this way, communicate this way, set goals this way. One of the baby steps can simply be just be more aware and pay attention to it. Because the funny thing is, sometimes those other things will fall out of that awareness. So I think for those folks who are listening to this and even care about knowing the strengths of the people around them, that's step number one. So 2 thumbs up for those of you who are checking this out.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dig into the third part of this question. So how can you leverage strengths to help people overcome challenges? So mentioned it a little earlier, but I want to dig into part of this specifically. And that is, how can you use strengths as a way to understand the challenge? Right. So, historically in companies, right, we talk about weaknesses and we talk about what people are bad at, or we talk about conflict and why people don't like each other, right? We boil it down to these certain ideas. But sometimes you can use strengths as a way to dig deeper into those higher level concepts. So, for example, is there a challenge right now because a person feels like they have to use their drainers, right? And so if we talk about strengths as the things that energize them, drainers are the things that suck their energy out, right? It's like taking a battery and just sucking it dry. Drainers are not fun. And so maybe you have an employee who's really on the struggle bus because the role they're in either requires them to use drainers or is perceived to be requiring them to use drainers. So that could be one piece. But maybe you're having a challenge because your strengths are going into overdrive, right? Go back to that example, Jon, that you just used. Maybe you've got multiple employees who are just going over the edge with their strengths and they're driving each other crazy. Right? Both of them feel they're in the right because they're using their strengths, but the fact that those strengths might be in conflict, that could create a challenge. Or maybe it doesn't even have to do with another person. Maybe your strengths are just in overdrive to the point where you're getting stressed out, or someone else is getting stressed out or whatnot. And then the other thing I think on this you can sort of look at too is sometimes challenges can arise, especially between people, when there is a strengths bias. And so what I mean by that is sometimes we can look at the strengths of other people and think that their strengths are dumb or useless, or that they're wrong and you're right. Right. I always joke around, right? People with emotional control are again those people who are really even keeled, right? They don't really waver too much from center on their emotional spectrum, or they know what the right emotional tone is for a situation. And so I always would get frustrated with that because it's like, oh my gosh, I can't tell what you're thinking, right? Emotional control people have excellent, excellent poker faces. It's like, I do not know what is going on in your brain. And as someone who is not emotional control in any way, shape, or form, I would be like, I hate that strength. I wish I knew what you were thinking. I wish you would just like, are you mad? Are you sad? Are you happy? Like, give me something. And that can create a challenge, right? Consider if you are an employee, and you've got a boss with emotional control. You're probably like, I don't know where I stand. I don't know if he hates me, loves me, thinks I'm doing great, thinks I'm doing terrible, right? Like, I don't know. And it may just be that, he has emotional control. And so you have to be careful about judging strengths as either good or bad, right or wrong, because they're not necessarily. It just depends on the context, right? So be careful about where you're biased towards your own strengths and against other people's strengths. Jon, where is it shown up for you? I see you smiling over there. So where's it shown up for you where like where we've got to take like kind of a big challenge and say, okay, using strengths, what's going on here?
Yeah. Uh, so I'm smiling because like with strength, it's so funny for me when I'm on coaching calls, let's say, right, and someone tells me like a sad story about why they didn't do something or whatever like that. I've got compassion and empathy as a strength, and that goes like those are the first things that go into overdrive, like right, and so knowing now that like those are my strengths, I can catch it a little bit, right, but I still don't have the courage, right, to do anything about it. Like I still won't call them on their BS or whatever, like 'cause sometimes, like most of the time, it is BS, right? I'll fall for whatever BS line you're going to give me, right? But I realize that now. So there's a few things, right? So I got a couple of my strengths in overdrive, and then there's one strength that I don't have, but I need to tap into a little bit, right? Or that like you think I should tap into it, but instead of like, okay, I don't have any courage to call these people out, right? So instead of thinking like I don't have courage, what I do is I take a look at my strength scope and I'm like, oh, I've got developing others, right? So how can I reframe having the courage, like I'm doing these hand quotes here, in developing others, using my developing others strength, like looking through that lens to hey, call out their BS or say, hey, like I hear your excuse. This is not helping you, like so I get to help them, by using or yeah, by using my developing others' strength and looking at it through that way. So that's one way I overcome like my own challenges, like when I'm going through coaching calls, um, yeah, and things like that.
Yeah, reframing is super powerful because you can you can reframe around your drainers in particular, right? I think it's incredibly powerful for that. So you were saying, right, courage is a drainer for you. And so reframing it into, okay, what's one of my other strengths that I can use instead of courage? Because I know I don't want to lean on courage because that's scary. Right? Like super powerful. One of not that it's a must have, but I love when I see that people have a self-improvement strength because like literally anything can be reframed through the lens of self-improvement, right? No matter what seems scary, what seems hard, but like anything that you want to avoid, if you can train your brain to go, okay, if I do this, it will make me a better person, right? Like it's that might just be the heck, that's how I go running anymore. It's like, okay, I hate running, but it'll make me better, so I'll go do it, right? Like that self-improvement strength. Again, there are other strengths you can lean on. I laugh whenever I see a self-improvement strength. I'm like, there's my leverage point. No matter what, we can always leverage that. Um, and then I think the other thing that you said, and this can be used for both drainers and overdrive, is where do I have another strength that I can counteract with? So in your case, okay, don't want to use courage. I'm going to go to self development or developing others instead. Um, you know, in overdrive, right? Oh, side note, it is like pouring rain here right now, and we need rain really bad. So awesome. I'm sure there are people who are listening to this who are in very dry areas who are just like, shut up. But yeah, anyway, sorry, I just got distracted for a moment because we need rain. Um, anyways, means I don't have to water my hostas today. Woohoo. Uh, but back to the idea of using strengths to counteract, you can also use it with overdrive. So, for example, like I have detail orientation as a strength, and that is like my easiest one to go into overdrive. Like where you were talking about like compassion, empathy, like for me, detail orientation, super easy to go into overdrive. Um, but I also have initiative as a strength. So sometimes when I'm like just getting lost in the weeds and want things to be absolutely perfect, I can lean on initiative to just, okay, we just got to do something. Right. I just got to get myself to do something. And I can deal with a little less perfection if it's moving forward. And so you can do that with all sorts of different strengths, whether it's overdrive or drainers. Um, One of the things to kind of go into overdrive. So, I guess, side note, what I find is really interesting is that most of our challenges are not actually from our drainers, they're from when we let our strengths go into overdrive. Um, I mean, yes, there are some things where it's like, oh, it seems like I need to use my drainer, but I think the vast majority of them are because we can't keep our strengths in check, and we end up on autopilot, and it causes problems. So I want to talk about two other strategies I thought of. Jon, you might have some others for managing when strengths go into overdrive. But one of my favorites is kind of modifying how you communicate with people. And so, for example, if I'm an emotional control person, so I know that I have a poker face. I know people have a real hard time reading me and that it annoys them. I might walk into a group and say, you know what, guys, just a heads up. I am very aware of the fact that I am hard to read. Please do not take that as that I don't like what you're saying or that I'm not interested. This is just my face. It's just how it looks, right? So you call it out on the front end of the conversation. Call out the elephant in the room. Take that same example, but on the flip side, let's say you're a super enthusiastic person and you know you're in a team of emotional control folks. You can say, hey guys, I know I get really excited about stuff and I know that sort of drives you nuts. Trust, I'm not trying to annoy you. It's just who I am. I'm just really excited about lots of different things. And now that might not like prevent all of the annoyance, right? It still happens, but at least the other people in the conversation can sort of like reorient themselves, or it's a new perspective, right? They can say, oh, see, here I thought you were just a jerk who looked grumpy all the time. Now I know you just don't show that much emotion. That's okay. Now that I know that, now I can approach this in a different way, because otherwise I would have started telling a story about how big of a jerk you are and how I never can tell what you're saying. So I am all about like calling out strengths in overdrive. I don't know about you, Jon.
Yeah, I think it's important. For one, for me to combat, I guess, the strengths in overdrive is I just need to be aware of them, and what are the things that I do typically that puts them into overdrive, or like what's my language when I'm into overdrive, right? But I also like the piece of letting everybody else know what your strengths are too. Like how many, like I don't know how many teams I've worked with, like even managers, they don't know, like we do all this strength scope assessments for everybody, right? And their managers don't really know what their strengths are. And then we're having managers call and they're just like, he just doesn't seem engaged, like he's just kind of like blah, and it's like, well, let's pull up the strength scope once, see what it looks like. Oh, weird, emotional controls on it. And I know we're like on the emotional control bus today, but but that's like one of the things in overdrive is you seem like you're just not into it. You're just not engaged, and once we just made that manager aware of, his employee's strength, he was like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe I just, like thought he wasn't into this, thought he was like ready to quit, but no, it's just emotional control. But knowing it, is going to help him now lead that person better. Just like with us, like we can lead ourselves, right? Like we can't lead anybody else before we lead ourselves. We got to be able to lead ourselves. So that's why we got to know what our strengths are and what we do when they go into overdrive before really we can lead anybody else or help other people.
Absolutely. One thing just to point out on that is that sometimes it can be hard to be aware of the fact that you are in overdrive. I think I was talking with Wade about this on a previous episode, and he told the story of when he was showing his strength scope to his wife that one of his strengths is persuasiveness, and she was like, "Oh, that makes sense," and he's like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, we'll go to a party and you will stand for hours trying to convince someone that your opinion is the right one and theirs is wrong. Like, you want to win the argument. And so, like, Wade, he was like, I didn't even notice. Like, sure, like, I know I enjoy a good debate every now and again, but he's like, oh. And so, one thing I just want to call out is that it can be very helpful to have someone you trust there to like wave the flag when you might need to like just dial it back a little bit, right? Someone who you trust, who can say, hey, I know you're not trying to drive people crazy, but like, you've been in this argument for 2 hours and you're a little overboard. We need to dial it back. Or I had a client once who was telling me that so she had optimism for a strength, and she was finding she's in sales. She was sending these proposals out to potential customers, and they kept getting turned down. And she's like, what in the heck is going on? Well, what she realized is that her optimism was kind of causing her to gloss over some details, because she was like, this is great. Like, this guy's going to love this proposal. And because she basically looked at it as like, hey, everything's going to work out fine, she was missing some things. And so she actually went and found like a coworker who she trusted, she was like, hey, I need you to look over this for me, because I know that my optimism is blinding me to some important things here. So she went and got backup, right? You can do that in meetings, right? You might have that person who just taps you on the arm and says, hey, you're being a little over enthusiastic for this crowd. Dial it back a little bit, right? Just because you might not realize you're going into overdrive because you are so just in the zone with your strengths. And so that other person can be really important.
Yep. Yeah. This is funny. So like when I have like a great day of like coaching calls or whatever, and I'm really into that developing others mindset. Like if my wife comes home from work or something, and maybe she had a rough day or something like that, right? And I instantly go to trying to help her, and she gets so annoyed. She's like, I don't want you to help me. I want you to just show some compassion. So it's like, yep. Strength and overdrive, beep, beep, honk the horn. Let's get off this bus and let's go to the compassion one.
Yeah. Well, and lucky for you, you can just sort of, once right? Once she calls your attention to it, you can change those gears. So definitely important.
Yep.
So just to recap, and how can you help people use their strengths to overcome challenges? So one, use the different strengths subtopics to understand the challenge. Is it a drainer? Is it strengths going into overdrive? Do they have a bias against certain strengths that's causing conflict between people? Like, just use some of those to sort of dig into what's actually going on here. And then if it's a drainer in particular, try to really reframe that through the lens of one of your other strengths. And if it's an overdrive, use one strength you have to counteract another. Try and communicate about, hey, I know I'm going into overdrive. It's not I know, I'm aware, right? Or use another person to help you become more aware of that overdrive happening. So Jon, I know we're getting close to our time here, and I want to wind us up, but I want to tackle this last portion of the question, which was, how can you use your strengths to position your own ideas or products? So what are some initial thoughts you have on this?
For me, it's all about like language, like how am I presenting my ideas and products, and is it aligned with the other people's strengths as well? Like if I'm positioning, like, so I've got detail orientation as a strength, right? So am I presenting an idea or a product to somebody that also has detail orientation, so they want all the details as well, right? Or am I presented to somebody that doesn't have like that, and that annoys them, right? So like for me, it's just being aware of what yours are and what theirs are, and then you can start communicating towards whatever their strengths are. You start using that kind of language to promote that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing you said in there that I think is really important is we have to be careful about assuming that communicating based on our strengths is good for the other person as well. I mean, it- detail orientation is usually like the easiest example to use with this one, right? Where you go in and because you're detail oriented, you just give the other person all of the information and they're either annoyed or they're like, okay, what was the most important thing that I needed to know, right? Like their brain just does not sort through all of that information like yours does. So be careful about assuming that your strengths are other people's strengths. Now sometimes they are, and sometimes like awesome, you guys are in sync. But sometimes they're not, and you've got to sort of rework that. I think my thoughts were very similar to yours, Jon, in that I like to see where is like the happy medium between my strengths and the other person's strengths, right? Especially so the way the question was asked, it was, I'm trying to convince someone that my ideas or my product is the best one, right? So if I'm the one presenting, right, I want to present in a way that matches my strengths, right? However I deliver the information. On the flip side, I want to make sure the information is received based on the other person's strengths. So, for one thing that I will sometimes do is, so I'm detail oriented, but maybe the person that I'm trying to pitch my idea to is super decisive. Again, they just want the top 3 bullets. I might do all the research and have that in my back pocket, but then I boil it down and just give them the top 3. But if they ask questions, guess who's got all the information and is ready to answer that question, right? So it's this happy medium of like, I'm working in my strengths, but I'm delivering in a way that you're going to be able to receive it. So I think that it definitely has to be a happy medium, right? Because you don't always want to be like only catering to the other person's strengths because like that might put you in sort of a draining space. But there's usually kind of a way. I mean, when we work with Strength Scope, right, you got 7 strengths to tap into. So, you might, there's a good chance you'll be able to find at least 1 or 2 of those that helps you kind of stay grounded, but also helps that other person receive the information. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, so our strengths is like when we can use our strengths, we're the most productive. We work better that way. Like it gives us more energy, right? So yeah, so we want to take the approach of using our strengths, like tapping into one of our 7 or multiple of our 7 strengths to be able to position the idea or present or whatever it is, right? But keep in mind of what their strengths are as well. So like we want to do all the work, we want to do everything within our strengths, but sometimes how we deliver it maybe and the language we can use just tap into their strengths with that type of language. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So, Jon, I think we tackled this question, at least hopefully enough that people got some good takeaways from it. So if you found this episode valuable, please share it with folks. We always appreciate that. And if you have a topic or a question you want us to answer on the podcast, whether that's me, Jon, Wade, Mark, we'll bring in somebody from the outside. We'll do whatever. So if you have other questions that you want us to dig into, please do not hesitate to shoot us an email, find us on social media, whatever, because we definitely want to be talking about things that are relevant to you guys. So, Jon, thanks again for coming on and helping me talk about strengths. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thanks again to Jon for joining us on the pod this week. To connect with him further, just check out the show notes for all of his social media information. If you like what you heard, make sure to jump over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. We appreciate the feedback and it helps other people find the show. As always, if you are looking for more resources to go from surviving to thriving, check out our website at www.markjeweltraining.com. That's Jewel with 2 L's. And you can find us under Mark Jewell Speaking and Training on all the major social channels. Remember, survival is dead. It's your time to thrive today. See you next week.